Hey everybody, welcome to the videos where we're breaking down the 8-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. A pretty decent sized slate for the playoffs, so I am looking forward to this slate. We got some good games on tap for us. I will say, a bit of a tricky slate for DFS purposes, but I think we'll be able to power our way through it. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I would tell you I'm going to be here all season long, but I think my days are numbered here for MLB, considering the slates are going to get small soon enough. So once the slates start getting probably below 4 games, I will not be posting anymore, and you guys will see me next season for MLB purposes. But I do cover other sports, including the NFL and NASCAR, and then the NBA eventually when that comes back up. I don't like these showdown slates for the playoffs. I don't really have much interest in that. But once we get back to main slates in the future, I'll be doing that as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day, or each and every single week, you might as well hit the subscribe button and turn that notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you don't follow me on social media, my handle's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated, but don't do it for MLB. I'm pretty much done posting MLB stuff. And also, if you are signing up for like NFL content or NASCAR content, which still have quite a few months to go, wait until the first of the month. I don't know how many days are in September. I always get confused on if it's what months are 30 and 31 days. But wait until the first of the month if you are going to sign up, because I don't want you guys to get double charged. But I think that's pretty much it for the plugging. If you're interested, you get access to the data sheets in the Discord chat. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say. So I think we can dive into today's slate. Also, the slate locks at 12 o'clock. So make sure you guys get your lineups locked in or your contest reserved, because it's going to be a very early lock time. And once again, the games are going to be staggered: 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, I don't know, 3, 4 or something, whatever. Then you have the Dodgers game at 10 p.m. So that'll be your late night hammer. But we'll start up top with Trevor Bauer. He's the guy I like the most on this slate, as he's having a fantastic season. I think you can make a case for him for being the NL Cy Young. And look, he's been great for DFS purposes. He's had multiple games over 35 fantasy points. Like, if we just want to count, I'll just count the number of games he's been over 35 fantasy points this season. First 3 starts were over 35, so that's 3. Then the next start was 40 versus KC. And then he had another one versus Chicago where he had 38 points, so that's 6. Then he had a 32-point game versus Pittsburgh, but I guess that doesn't count. But then versus Milwaukee in his last start of the season, he had 41 fantasy points on 8 innings, striking out 12. So that gives him 7 starts over 35 fantasy points this season, which is absolutely insane. His floor is super high because he goes over 100 pitches in each and every single outing. The only time he did not go over 100 pitches in an outing was versus KC, when the game was only 7 innings because of a doubleheader, and he happened to go all 7 innings. So we'll give him a pass there. But the guy pitches deep in every single game. He's been fantastic this season if you're looking at his overall numbers. A 1.73 ERA, xFIP's at 3.25, but that's still pretty good with a 36% K rate, not allowing much hard contact whatsoever. Now, the matchup versus the Braves, I wouldn't say it's great, but that's the issue with the playoffs, and that's what kind of makes this a little bit tricky is, yeah, pretty much all these pitchers are pretty good, but pretty much all the offenses are good too, so it's kind of just a who do you think's going to win out. I'll side with Trevor Bauer here. The Braves can strike out a bit. Now, they do have plenty of power, and they're striking out more versus lefties compared to righties. But Bauer's just been so good this year. They have a 24% K rate. I think he'll be okay. Am I expecting a 40-point game here from Trevor Bauer? I am not. I mean, these pitchers aren't invincible. I think the best 2 pitchers this season from the NL and the IL have been Shane Bieber and Trevor Bauer. And you guys just saw last night, Shane Bieber got absolutely destroyed, which hurt my soul because you guys know I'm a huge Indians fan. I was excited to see Shane Bieber pitch, and he ruined my night. It sucked. It sucked big time. The Yankees scored 11 runs, I think. It was awful. But that's baseball sometimes. But I think Trevor Bauer's going to be okay here. He's $9,000. I mean, he should be around $11,000, which I do realize the pricing is a little bit skewed in the playoffs. We saw Bieber at $9K, Garrett Cole $8,600, so I understand what they're doing. But it's still a pretty good price point for Trevor Bauer. And 8 strikeouts over in Vegas. He is an underdog here and nearly 4 runs for the Braves, but I mean, it's not the greatest spot in the world, but it is Trevor Bauer, so I think he's interesting. Walker Buehler, 8,800. I have not seen any news on a pitch count. I know he doesn't really typically pitch too deep into games, but this is the playoffs, and obviously every game is a must-win. So if I assume if he's pitching well, he'll be pitched decently deep into the game. I don't think we're going to get 100 pitches out of the guy. I mean, who knows? But he's dealing with a blister injury as well. Now, his last start versus Oakland on September 24th, he had 65 pitches for 6 strikeouts, and he scored 19.8 fantasy points. That's not too bad. Although I just hate the pitch count for this guy. Like, looking at his numbers this year, 56, 79, 87, 89, 92, that's pretty good. Then 71, 61, and 65. Also, the blister thing gives me a little bit of worry as well because that can always flare up. I believe it did in his start versus Arizona. I rostered him that day, and the blister kind of killed his day. But this is a good spot versus Milwaukee. They are a team that has struggled versus right-handed pitching this season, looking at their numbers. A 27.2% K rate, a 217 batting average, and 83 WRC plus. Overall, they have struggled versus righties. He's pitching at home in Dodger Stadium. So I think Buehler's okay. It's just the problem is the pitch count is the only issue. I don't think he's going to go too deep in the game, but we should get at least 70 pitches as long as he's pitching well. So I think he's okay. I feel a little bit safer with Bauer just because I know the guy's going to get 100-plus pitches unless he's getting absolutely destroyed, which I really don't think that's going to happen. Then dropping down Tyler Glasnow, 8,400, which he might be my favorite pitcher on the slate just because he's a little bit cheaper than Trevor Bauer, and Toronto's one of the softer matchups here. I wouldn't say they're like a super soft team, but we saw Blake Snell have a good game last night, and Glasnow has been on absolute fire recently. Looking at his game log, 27, 29, 21, 19, 33, 38, and 21. He's also striking out everybody for the most part. 13, 9, 9, 7, 10, 8. Those are his strikeout numbers. We saw him have a couple of games over 100 pitches, and in his last start he only had 76 pitches, but I think Tyler Glasnow should have a pretty solid game here versus Toronto. If you're looking at their splits versus righties this season, pull it up here. They're not striking out a ton at only 21%, but a 9% walk rate, 192 team ISO, 109 WRC plus, 329 WOBA. These numbers aren't that bad, but again, it's the playoffs, so these teams aren't going to be abysmal. You're like, we're not going to see the Pittsburgh Pirates in the playoffs. Yeah, they suck versus righties, but this is the playoffs, guys, and we're not going to see these kind of teams, so you're going to have to take what you get for the most part, but the talent's there for Tyler Glasnow. He's striking out everybody. He's got a 38% strikeout rate in the season, which is above Trevor Bauer. Now, giving up 1.73 home runs per innings and a nearly 40% hard contact rate. He also has almost a double-digit walk rate, so that's a little bit of an issue. But his xFIP's at 2.75, which is over or near a run and a half lower than his ERA. So Tyler Glasnow, probably one of my favorite options on the slate. Now, after these two guys, there's plenty of value on this slate where if you want to go up with Trevor Bauer and Tyler Glasnow, go for it. It shouldn't kill you too much, and they're also not that expensive. But if you want to save some money, I have Kyle Hendricks and Masahiro Tanaka here listed. Now, Hendricks is an interesting case. If there wasn't wind blowing out in Chicago, I'd say he's probably like the chalk SP2 on this slate. But the thing is, there's heavy wind blowing out in Chicago, so I believe it's going around, I think they said 15 to 20 miles per hour going out to right, so that way, or I guess that way. Sorry, the computer has my camera flipped, which is going to be a big boost for left-handed bats. If you don't know anything about Wrigley Field, when the wind is blowing out in Wrigley, there's a huge, huge boost to bats, and it's also a huge downgrade to pitching. So I'm a little bit worried about Kyle Hendricks here. I think there's a couple of decent value plays on Miami that potentially could get a cheap home run or something. But Hendricks, I don't think he's going to be a guy that gets absolutely he's not typically a guy that gets destroyed. He's kind of like a vanilla pitcher. He doesn't get a bunch of strikeouts, but typically he has decent outings. Like on the season, he's got a 2.80 ERA, which is pretty good, and a 3.78 xFIP, only a 20% K rate. But the matchup is pretty solid versus Miami, but there is a couple of Miami bats that I like. So I'm not totally picking on these guys, but they do have a 25% K rate in the season, 120 team ISO, and only a 298 WOBA, and 89 WRC plus. And Kyle Hendricks, again, he's a guy that's going to get a lot of ground balls for the most part. Doesn't give too much hard contact, only 26%. So I think he's fine at 7,700. The matchup is good, but I'm letting you know now that wind does worry me. I do like some of the Miami bats here, some of the cheap lefties like Matt Joyce and Corey Dickerson, and then also have plenty of interest in the Cubs bats as well. Then Masahiro Tanaka at 6,700. I have him listed here just because he's the cheapest pitcher on the slate. I might be biased, but I don't love using guys versus the Indians. I liked Garrett Cole yesterday. I mean, he's just one of the best pitchers in baseball, and the Indians really have not been that great offensively this year. But I think Tanaka at 6,700 should have a decent game. I think some of the lefties or maybe a couple of the righties here on the Indians could do a little bit of damage here, and the Indians definitely need a rebound game here for sure. So I guess that'd be one downside to using Tanaka, but he's the cheapest pitcher on the slate, and he's not that bad. I mean, 4.19 xFIP on the season, a 22% K rate, 4% walk rate. Not a great pitcher, but I think he'll be okay if looking at the Indian splits versus righties, only an 87 WRC plus. They do walk quite a bit, don't really strike out much, but it's mainly just a price play. If we need the salary for him, I think he's interesting, and we'll move on to the bats now, which I think are maybe a little bit more fun to talk about, but I don't really love a lot of these spots. But we'll start up top here at catcher with Will Smith at 4,800. So Brent Suter is going to be the opener for the Brewers, and then I'm pretty sure he's going to be followed by quite a few righties. I saw Josh Lindblom and Freddie Peralta as candidates, so let's just assume that's the case. In Brent Suter, I don't know how many innings he's going to go, maybe 1, maybe 2. I'm not totally sure here. But the Dodgers, I think they'll have the highest implied team total in the slate. I was looking at, from where I pulled, there was no numbers up yet, but I saw another site that had the Dodgers at around a 5 implied team total, which I think was the highest. So yeah, well, that's interesting. The Dodgers, the problem is they're super expensive, so it's not going to be that easy to fit in, but there is plenty of value on this slate if you do want to get a couple of Dodgers bats in your lineup. Now, Will Smith, he's been better versus righties compared to lefties, but the numbers versus lefties aren't that bad. 276 batting average and a 400 on base percentage, one near 150 ISO. Been better versus the righties, but like the Dodgers have one of the best offenses in baseball, so I think they'll be fine there. And he should see a righty at some point. Like Brent Suter, like I said, he's going to be the opener, but I'm not sure exactly that he's going to go too deep into the game. Wilson Contreras at 4,700. You'll see a common theme here of Chicago Cubs, just because as of right now, the wind is expected to be blowing out, and there's a huge boost for bats. It's going to help the lefties out more, assuming they pull the ball than it is the righties. But, the righties are in play as well. Contreras, he's been actually better versus righties as well. Sandy Alcantara is not a bad pitcher. And it's kind of crazy seeing the Marlins in the playoffs. I don't think I fully processed that yet, but that's something that I would certainly not have expected early on in the season. If you told me the Marlins were making the playoffs, I probably would not have believed you. But Contreras, okay pop versus righties, 158 ISO, 258 batting average, 113 WRC plus. Not crazy numbers, but he's a guy that's got some power. And Alcantara, I prefer lefties versus him. Lefties are in a really good spot here, but he's had a lower strikeout rate than righties this year. But I like all the Cubs for the most part, just due to the wind blowing up quite a bit. And then Victor Caratini at 2,300, just a cheap lefty here versus Sandy Alcantara, and he's pretty much the bare minimum at only 2,300. And versus righties, the numbers aren't going to be too pretty, but again, it's just a free catcher in a good hitting environment with the wind blowing out. Assuming the wind's still blowing out. I know weather can change, but as of right now, it says it's blowing out to right, and that's the only information I can go off of as of right now. Anthony Rizzo at 4,400. I like him quite a bit. First base is pretty weak on this slate, and also there's actually quite a few positions that are pretty weak on this slate, but Anthony Rizzo, he stands out by far the best option. He hits right-handed pitching very well. This season he's struggling a little bit, but over the course of his career he's always been great versus righties. And again, this is a big boost for left-handed bats in Chicago. Carlos Santana, 3,600. He looked pretty awful last night. Garrett Cole just made him look silly on a couple of bats early on in the game, but I think he's okay for the price point. He's a guy that's going to walk a lot, not hit for a high batting average. He's been better versus lefties this season compared to righties, but Tanaka, I think he's a fine pitcher, but he's certainly not immune, and he's a much softer matchup for the Indians than Garrett Cole is, so I don't mind Carlos Santana there. And Jesus Aguilar at 2,900. Prefer him versus lefties, but he's still doing fine versus righties this year, and again, the wind's blowing out, so at only 2,900, I think he's worth a shot if you want to get contrarian and stack up the Marlins. 270 batting average to righties this season and a 165 ISO. Nothing too crazy, but he's pretty much dirt cheap. Dropping out of second base. Second base is trash today for the most part, but Chris Taylor going up against a lefty. He'll stay righty at some point. He's actually hit righties better this year, which is not like it was in prior seasons. Chris Taylor's always been a guy that's been pretty solid versus lefties, but versus the righties this year, a 310 batting average, a 157 WRC plus, and over a 400 WOBA. So very, very good numbers versus righties, and you'll see one at some point, so I think Taylor's interesting. Jason Kipnis, 3,000. This is a cheap lefty here versus Alcantara in windy Wrigley tomorrow. I guess that's what you want to call it, but he's got a near 300 batting average to right-handed pitch in the season, which is good enough for me at the price point. And Chad Pender, 2,200, going up against a lefty in Dallas Keuchel. Keuchel is a guy that's going to get a lot of ground balls, and he doesn't allow a ton of power, but you want righties versus him. And Pender, if he does anything well, it's just having a little bit of pop versus lefties with a 261 ISO, but that's pretty much it now. He's got actually hitting for a decently high batting average versus righties this season, but overall, he's always been a little bit better versus lefties. Then dropping down to third base, we have Manny Machado, 5,500, going up against a lefty in Kim, who he's not a bad pitcher, but they do have a pretty high team total at 4.45 here, which if this was a normal slate, 4.45 is not really going to get you out of bed to get excited about, but on the playoff slate, yeah, it's not too bad at 4.45. So I think we can look at some of these Padres here. Machado does hit lefties very well. He's one of the best left-handed mashers in the league. 610 slugging in there, 340 batting averages overall, some very strong numbers. So I think Machado is a solid option. Jose Ramirez, he's fine for tournaments, just because he was on fire at the end of the season, and he's a guy that can be very streaky, and when he's on fire, you probably want to roster him in at least some lineups. I don't think you have to play him, but I prefer Machado over him just because I like the lefty matchup there. But Ramirez, he's been better versus lefties, but he still has good numbers versus righties, so I think he's fine. Tanaka will give up some power. Chris Bryant, 3,700. He's decently cheap here. I always like him better versus lefties. The numbers versus righties aren't going to be exciting in the slightest. As you're going to see, dark red bars here, a 163 batting average, a 33 WRC plus, and overall very, very weak numbers. But wind's blowing out, so it's going to be a boost for the bats here, and I like that price point. And Eugenio Suarez is only 3,500 going up against a lefty here. He hits left-handed pitching very well. This season, a very low batting average to lefties, but he's still got over a 300 ISO versus them at 313. Again, the average numbers are low and he's striking out a bit, but I mean, you can get a cheap home run here versus Max Fried. Corey Seager, 5,500. Prefer him versus righty. He's going to open up with a lefty here, but at some point he should see a righty, and he's still hitting lefties well this year. 258 ISO and over 300 batting average, so it's not like he's been bad versus lefties, and I think at the end of the season he did homer off a lefty against the Athletics. But anyway, I'm a big fan of Corey Seager, and look, the Dodgers are going to be one of the best stacks on the slate, if not the best stack. They're just coming at an expensive price point, but he crushes righties, and he's good versus lefties, so don't mind Corey Seager. Tatis, 5,300, great versus lefties. Actually been a bit better versus righties this year. Last year, he was amazing versus lefties, but overall, he's one of the best players in the league, and the Padres stack is pretty interesting here, and he does hit lefties pretty well. So if you want to go with the Tatis Machado little stack there and throw in Will Myers, I don't mind that, but they're all three above $5,000, which is a little rough. Javi Baez, this is just getting exposure to the Cubs with the wind blowing out here. Better versus lefties, but again, he's cheap enough. I was going to say cheap, but he's not really cheap, but he's a bit of a discount of Seager and Tatis. Then Polanco, if you want a value shortstop, he's 3,300 going against Urquidy. I'm not really sure, but he's fine. I mean, his numbers this season versus righties aren't great. He's been better versus lefties, which is complete opposite from last season. So he did a 180 there, but I think he's okay for the price point. The numbers aren't going to impress you too much, but he's just 3,300. Dropping down to the outfield, we have Mookie Betts, who's actually sucked versus lefties this season. Like, he's been bad. A 196 batting average, a 0.20 ISO. It's not like he hasn't faced lefties this year. He's faced lefties. He's just not doing that well versus them. But he'll see a righty at some point anyway, and he's one of the best bats in the league versus right-handed pitching, like just dark green bars all around here, and I don't think I really have to explain why Mookie Betts is probably a good play on most slates. Will Myers, he is crushing lefties this year, and if you want to throw him on your little Padres stack, I don't mind that at all. On your 340 batting average versus them this year, 176 WRC plus, 432 WOBA, and a 305 ISO, so he is crushing lefties, so he's certainly playable. A.J. Pollock, another guy that's crushing lefties this season. And we'll have to see where he hits in the order. He typically goes a little bit higher in the order versus lefties, but we'll have to see. As of right now, I have him in the bottom half. But 340 ISO to lefties, 149 WRC plus, a 320 batting average. So I definitely feel pretty good about those numbers. Ian Happ, 4,000. He's probably one of my favorite plays in the entire slate. Assuming the wind's blowing out, he just makes a ton of sense for me. He's been crushing righties this year. He crushed them last year. And looking at the splits, over a 300 ISO to righties, 568 slugging, and overall some very strong numbers. And Alcantara, we're going to want lefties versus him. 358 will be given up to them this season. And Happ, I think he's just a bit too cheap here. And the Cubs they potentially could be the best stack on the slate. I kept leaving them out when I talked about the Dodgers and the Padres with their team totals. I would imagine the Cubs, assuming the weather's correct, they could have a team total close to 6, which would make them by far the best stack on the slate because they're actually pretty cheap too. So I would imagine they're going to end up being very, very popular as long as the wind is indeed blowing out. Max Kepler, 3,900, going up against a righty. He has great numbers versus righties, near 300 ISO, 534 slugging and 259 slugging. Doesn't really strike out too much either, so Kepler's playable. So is Eddie Rosario. Jason Hayward, 3,800. He's had some really good numbers versus righties this year, like very good numbers. A 320 batting average, a 426 WOBA, over a 200 ISO, and a 169 WRC plus. So I think that price we're getting on Hayward. And again, if the wind is blowing out, these guys are by far, they're going to grade out as the best plays on the slate here. And then Kyle Schwarber, similar reasons to what I already mentioned. He's got power to righties. Tommy Pham, just another Padres bat. He's been fine versus lefties this season. He was injured for quite some time, but a near 300 batting average versus them, 400 on base percentage, and overall some very strong numbers. So Tommy Pham is playable at only 3,600. And then we have two Marlins bats just to end this, assuming the wind is blowing out. Don't really love picking on Kyle Hendricks. But Dickerson and Joyce, they both got some okay splits versus righties here. Joyce a 252 batting average, but keep in mind he's $2,000. And then Corey Dickerson a near 300 batting average. Not a ton of power, but they're fine here. They're fine if the wind's blowing out. Big boost to the left-handed bats, but that's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, consider that subscribe button. It really helps me out. Really do appreciate that, and I think that's just about it. I'll see you guys in the next one, hopefully. We'll see what size the slate is, but see you guys in the next one.